Okay, before we start, my name is Rabbi Binyamin Blau. I have the honor of being the Rabbi of Gunot Synagogue and the privilege of officiating at the funeral today of Tova Baron, a great lady who we will all miss. Before we start, I'm going to ask everyone, if you can, please turn off all electronic devices, silence all the cell phones, everything else, so you can have the proper decorum during the course of the service. I'm going to start off with a parak of Tehillim, a chapter of Psalms. Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai Roi Lo Exor, Binos Desha Yabiteni Amemenuchos Yinahaleini, Nafshi Yishovev, Yankein Bimaglei Sedek Leman Shemo, Kam Ki Elek Begeitza Maves Lo Iwara Ki Ata Imadi, Shifta Kol Mishan Techa Hema Yinachamuni, Tarok Lefanai Shulchan, Neged Zoriroi, Dishan Tov Hashem Ben Roshi Kosi Rivoya, Ach tov v'chesed yudefuni kol yemei chayai, v'shavti v'eis Adonai li'orech yamim. A song of David, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not lack. God caused me to lie down in lush pastures, God leads me beside tranquil waters. God restores my soul and guides me in righteous path for God's name's sake. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your scepter and staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in full view of my adversaries. You have anointed my head with oil. My cup overflows. May only goodness and kindness pursue me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord for length of days. I must admit, every time I read this chapter of Tehillim, this chapter of Psalms, and I read the passage of people walking through the valleys of the shadow of death, and we pay tribute to a survivor, a woman who overcame unbelievable horrors and rebuilt her life, those psukim, those verses, are so much more poignant. We're coming today to pay respects to a beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother, a devoted sister, a treasured aunt, a valued and critical community member, and truly a fighter for the Jewish people. It really is, in many ways, over the last few years, as the Rabbi of Gunot Synagogue, I feel like I'm presiding over the end of an era. Tova was one of the unique group of survivors who came to Cleveland and who built our synagogue, who built the Gunot Synagogue, and raised a Jewish family in defiance of the Nazis who tried to exterminate us. She was born in Czechoslovakia. She was the youngest of 9 children. She was named after an older sister who had passed. She was only 12 years old when she was taken. Her 13th birthday was in Auschwitz. Amazingly, using strength and guile, she survived those horrors, as did 3 of her sisters. We have one sister who's still, Baruch Hashem, still with us. And she emerged from both Auschwitz and the infamous Death March, and she survived them both. Initially, she joined the Zionist youth group and tried to go to Israel, but wound up in prison yet again in Cyprus. Incredibly, on Bevan's birthday, she was allowed into Israel. It's okay. The sound of children of her own next generations are a beautiful sound and a fitting sound. Besides, on a lighter note, I feel like I'm in synagogue. She was finally allowed into Israel, where she first joined the Irgun and later what became the IDF. What amazing strength and heroism to be able to play those roles so soon after experiences in the death camp. Through her cousin, she met a fisherman And in 1952, they got married and started an amazing, beautiful life together. They were married for 62 years, each one playing their role. He was the electrician who provided for the family and was relatively quiet. She was the homemaker and the outgoing, vivacious one. They wanted to join their family in the States. They initially went to Canada by way of Paris, spent time in Montreal and Toronto before coming to the U.S. in 1955. They spent the rest of their life in this greater Cleveland area, even if they kept, as the boys and I were sharing yesterday, our son saying, they kept moving up Cedar, going from Cleveland Heights to South Euclid to Beechwood and eventually to Lyndhurst. As I mentioned, Tova was the outgoing one, who was incredibly close to her family, speaking Yiddish to her sisters constantly, and was beloved by all her extended family, especially her nieces and nephews. Due to her young age, she was the youngest of the family. She was more like an older sister than really an aunt. She had 3 sons, tragic losing Mark at the age of 44, and no daughters, so the oldest female cousins were really her girls. She was a very devoted mother and grandmother and was even blessed to have 5 great-grandchildren. Family was everything, and her care of her husband in his later years was exceptional. She was an incredible balabasta, making the best cholent and wonderful Shabbos and Yom Tov meals. When I was meeting yesterday with Eric and Mitchell, they were talking about how they used to get in trouble trying to steal the food that she was making before she had finished cooking it. It was so good. But we're trying to learn lessons from her life, and she was a critical member of our community, the Cleveland Jewish community. She was the one who insisted that her home be a Jewish household. Her children recalled how she lit yahrzeit candles for every member of the family before each of the holidays. She was active in Kol Israel and at the Green Road Synagogue. She helped coordinate social events, and I was told, for those who remember the previous building we were in, she was the one who chose that crystal ball that hung in the old building. Fluent in Hebrew, she befriended all the Israelis. Everyone heard about Tova. She hosted fun parties for her fellow Greeners and for the Israelis to make them feel welcome, to make them feel connected. She was very outgoing, loved bowling, and was quite proficient, winning many, many trophies. In her later years, at her home in Florida, she continued the same qualities and relationships, playing cards with all of her, again, the expression, the greener friends who moved down to Florida. She leaves behind a glorious legacy, and that's really what we're paying tribute to today. In the month of Nisan, in the month where Pesach is coming, we don't have the traditional eulogies, but we really feel a focus on learning lessons from a person's life. Here's a woman who defied Hitler, not just by surviving, but by rebuilding the Jewish community here in Cleveland and by creating her family that carries on her tradition. In fact, yesterday when we were sitting together, her sons were describing what it was like in the high holidays when they came to Green Road Synagogue, and all the family would be together, and she was so proud. And they said she spent her time looking at them the entire time. That was the fusion of all the things that were most dear to her. Her tradition, her commitment to Judaism, and her family that she built, her family that she loved, her family that she cherished. Yehi Zachra Baruch. May her memory be a blessing, and may the family continue her legacy for many years to come. I'm going to ask different members of the family to come up and share their thoughts. Going in order, we'll start with Eric, then we'll have Jacob, Elise, and Ben. We'll all say a few words.
Thank you all for coming. My mother's name at birth was Gittel, from the word git, or good in Yiddish. A perfect name for her because she was indeed good. She was a gitter mensch, a genuinely good person who lived a memorable and historic life. The arc of history she lived through and the determined and courageous way she lived it is legendary. But most of you knew her as Tova. She became a one-name moniker, Tova. But unlike a Beyonce or a Cher, she was more like a Napoleon or Geronimo. She was an irrepressible force of nature, a life force so strong and a presence so large that so many came to love and admire. She was a good wife, mother, sister, cousin, friend, and neighbor. She was a woman of valor, a good soldier, and a good citizen. She was gregarious and friendly. She loved to joke and socialize. She was also very tough and opinionated, and she could argue with the best of them. Her instincts were fine-tuned, and her street smarts and philosophical insights incredible for a woman with little to no education. Her tenacity to survive the Holocaust and a few years later fighting to establish the State of Israel, she lived her life with a middle finger to the sky attitude towards her oppressors and was part of a new generation of Jews that fight back. She found another Gitter in my dad, her loving husband of 63 years, a handsome, intelligent, hardworking, and rather sexy man who turned women's heads when he entered the room. They were quite the couple. They formed a beautiful family, if I may say so myself. 3 sons, defying the Nazis that destroyed their family trees, starting a new branch from the remains that now includes 5 great-grandchildren. She was good to her family. Family meant everything to her. As a mother, she was a lioness, protective and always worrying for our welfare. When I chose to venture out and chase my dreams, she told me I was meshuggah, but she supported me nonetheless. As a sister, she was always helpful and fiercely loyal. To her nieces and nephews, she was most beloved, especially by the older ones who always admired her youthful vitality. To her friends, she was a constant source of fun and irreverence. She always had a joke or laughter to lighten things up. She was good to her grandchildren, their bubby, who loved and advocated for them. Friday nights at Bubby's and Papa's was special. Her chicken soup, and like the rabbi said, the cholent will be missed by them. And if you didn't like what she was serving, she gladly invited you to kriech mir auf and pickle. She instilled Jewish values in our home, always lighting Shabbos candles, never losing her faith. She lit candles every Yizkor, like the rabbi said, for all her dead relatives, never forgetting them. My cousins and brothers and I, we share a common legacy. We're a unique generation who didn't have grandparents. And it would be a fitting tribute to her for us all to remember her story. Let our kids and grandchildren never forget her courage when faced with Holocaust denial and anti-Semitism. I want her to be remembered not only as a warrior, but also as the kind, compassionate, generous, and inspiring woman that she truly was. Everyone here today has a Tova story. She touched us all in such a very strong way. Indeed, she was one of the good ones, possessed with a git neshuma, a good soul. May her goodness stay in your hearts forever, and may her memory be a blessing. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you all for being here. I put some words together last night, and I didn't even know about this month. Sorry. I didn't even know that, we're not supposed to do traditional eulogies, and my father's speech was talking stories, Tova stories. And funny enough, I wrote, a lot about the stories from my grandmother's life. The stories were very important to her. She always made it a very high priority for all of us to know her story, to understand the story of where we came from, what it means to be who we are. I have, like all of us, we have 2 parents. I was lucky. I had all 4 of my grandparents. It was like growing up with 6 parents. They all had their own opinions too. But they all had stories, and having such a wide base to pull from for my history, for who we are. And I was very lucky to have all of my grandparents. I know that my dad didn't have that, my wife didn't have that. A lot of I take it for granted sometimes because for a lot of my childhood, I spent as much time with Bubby as my own parents. Friday nights, sometimes we'd stay there Friday night, Saturday night. She had beds waiting for us in her house at all times. It was a second home, a third home. It was a comfortable place. And we spent a lot of time together, just me alone with Bubby, with Papa, with the 3 of us, with my brother, the 4 of us. She always had a lesson to teach: how to cook, how to play cards, how to keep crumbs off the table, how to tell a joke. But it was very important how to tell a story. And the delivery is always very important because why are we even telling the stories in the first place? And there were so many stories, literally unbelievable stories. I would share these stories with my friends, and when I was older with my coworkers, they would look at me like I was making them up because they were so incredible. Bubby lived through some horrible times, some amazing times. She helped build a country. She helped build a family, and shared all of that with all of us. And I know she told a lot of stories, not just to me and my brother, to my cousins, but to everyone. You wouldn't be here today if she hadn't shared a story with you, or if you weren't part of one of her stories. What made these stories so meaningful was what they represented, what they meant to her. And she showed how important it was that we really learned those. She wanted them to mean the same thing to us, to never forget. Never forget. She would repeat it frequently. Never forget. It's important you know who you are, where you come from. Like my dad said, she was a fighter. She was willing to fight for who she was and the freedom to be who we are today here as a family. 2 simple words: never forget. Those stories were her sharing her life, sharing her lessons with us, for us to have health and prosperity that she wanted for herself and fought for so hard. And so some of these stories were very grim, very difficult to hear, to learn. Her Holocaust stories were, as young as I first exposed them, were a challenge to understand, that this was even real. And as I grew older, and in the world we live today, it's very important that we just have those stories and learn, and I had the opportunity to learn how to build a better world. Some of the stories were inspiring, what it took to come to America and build a family, to build a community. This town was very important to Bubby. Everyone, was very important. Do you know this person? How do you know this person? It was a very different mentality from everyone else in my life. I'm going to tell a small story. One time, Bubby and I were together. We didn't know what to do. We said, let's go fishing. We went down to the pier. We rented poles. We rented a few shrimp. I think we run our last shrimp probably. We pull out the tiniest little fish. Maybe about this big. We caught a fish this big. Big story, small story. We took the fish home. We probably should have thrown it back. And I think Bubby, just to prove that she could, filleted this fish and fried it up in these little tiny little cutlets for a snack. Just because I believe she wanted to know she could. And, I take that with me because that's the kind of person I want to be, is I want to try things just to know I can do them. And that's the impact that my Bubby Tova had on my life. These stories are like cheat codes for your life. They are lessons. They're invaluable tools to help me survive in a cruel and difficult world. They weren't always easy lessons to learn as a kid, but they were, as I get older, I see how important they are now and try to teach my daughter as much of the same as I can. But Bubby's life was very important to her. It was very important that we understood her life. And now I understand why. And it took me 40 years to get there. And I want to thank everyone here for being here to share those stories and to never forget what the kind of person she was and what she did for each of us and what she helped us achieve in our lives. And thank you.
I've had a really hard time figuring out what to say today. I could recap my Bubby's life and describe her personality, but the enormity of that exceeds this space. Everyone here had a relationship with Tova, each special, filled with unique memories. However, I'd like to argue that mine was the most special. So I've decided to share some of my memories in our relationship. My Bubby was an extremely social person. She had more friends than I could keep track of, and we had many outings with other Bubbies. My favorite, though, was when we would take the Rapid down to Tower City with a friend of hers and her granddaughter to go shopping. I felt so special because she took me, and only me, sorry, Corey, on this fancy excursion. Tower City was really nice back then, I swear. Keeping with her social nature, Bubby loved to cook and entertain. She always had a really long dining table to hold an ever-rotating group of family and friends for Shabbat. Now, Bubby never let anyone in her kitchen. No one could help, no one could linger. It was her domain, period. However, little by little, I was allowed in. I would help carry matzo ball soup to the table. Sometimes she let me plate the chicken and bring that out too. Eventually, this led to full lessons on latkes and chicken soup. Even as a young girl, I knew the importance of what I was being taught. I knew it was special. As you have probably gathered by now, I was very close with my Bubby. But it wasn't just the special treatment I got, being the only other XX chromosome in the family. My Bubby was, and still is, my hero. Throughout my life, when I faced something scary or particularly hard, I would tell myself, if my Bubby could survive the Holocaust, I can get through this. It wasn't just the incredible stories of her past that I admired, but also the superpowers I witnessed firsthand, like the ability to catch flies midair with one hand, or take you down out of nowhere with a swift bend of the knees. She also had the powers to bend the time-space continuum. She created the phenomenon known as Tova time, and the rules of the road didn't apply to the physics that she subscribed to. Her greatest power, however, was her love. No cost was ever too great, no distance too far, no act too crazy when it came to those she cared about. For me, I witnessed this power most clearly with my children. Every time we came to visit with Des in tow, time seemed to stand still. The joy radiating from her transported me back to childhood. The same games she would play with me, the same smile, the same open arms. I brought Vivi to meet Bubby for the first time when she was in the hospital. I was prepped with, she hasn't eaten in days, she's weak and confused. I handed her my 2-month-old daughter with my hands supporting beneath her. After she flashed Viv her biggest smile and said, "Hi," she turned to me and said, "What, you think I'm going to drop her?" So I backed away and watched the power of her love give her the strength to hold that baby. My Bubby's existence in my life holds an incredible amount of weight. As I started the process of saying goodbye, I felt the world shift. At first, I couldn't quite understand it. I couldn't describe it. But now I realize that it's the absence of that weight. It's a change in my life's gravitational pull. Although right now I feel unsettled, I know that the next time I make a pot of chicken soup, I'll be comforted not only by the warm broth, but by its representation of the legacy of tradition, family, and love that my bubby leaves behind.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming. I didn't prepare anything, so I'm just going to keep it short. I love my bubby very much. She loved us all very much. I loved sitting in the kitchen with her and drinking Cokes and talking about life. I'd often be in trouble or rebellious and have to sit on the couch with Bubby, and those moments were the best, because she would put everything into perspective in a way no one else could. Knowing what she's been through and who she was, it all made sense, and I carried that. It almost programmed my brain. With all her warmth and everything she taught me, the main thing I think she did teach me was how to be a man. And she always had a bicep. She was always tough. She could handle anything. I feel like everything good in my life is because of her. She programmed my brain in a way that I could always put things in perspective and read people and read situations. And, after hearing her stories from the camps, she evaded capture almost every day. And she had a street sense, or whatever you want to call it, that kept her alive and kept her, brought her to us. I feel like I have those same instincts, those same senses that have kept me from dark periods in my life, and everything good I have is because of her. Thank you.
After hearing the words of her son and 3 of her grandchildren, I think it merely echoed everything that I said earlier, the power of her commitment to her family and the unbelievable legacy that she leaves behind. Each one of them expressed what she meant to them, and I think in a similar vein, that's why we're all gathered here today, what she meant to all of us. May her memory be a blessing, and may we really instill in our children and grandchildren all those lessons from her and her generation that are so critical to the survival of the Jewish people of Am Yisrael. Being, again, as I noted earlier, it's the month of Nisan, so there are slight deviations to the funeral service. We're going to end with a parak of Tehillim, with a chapter of Psalms. After the service is concluded, the interment will be at Zion Memorial Park, 5461 North Full Road, and the family will be sitting to Shiva today. We'll be receiving friends at Acacia Park. It's 2202 Acacia Park in Lyndhurst, and that'll be after the interment until 8 p.m. I'm going to ask everyone to please rise while we say this parak of Tehillim, this chapter of Psalms. It's Tehillim Tez Zion. Michtam leDavid, Shemreini Yaki Chasi Sivach, Amat Adonai, Adonai Ata Tavati Balolecha, Likdoshim Asher Be'eretz Hema, Vadirei Kol Chef Sivam, Yibuat Vasam Achar Maharu, Balasik Nixlihem Midam, Balasash Mosam Al Sfosoi, Adonai Menas Kalki V'chosi Ata Tamich Korali, Chavalim Naftali Banimi Maf Nafalach Shafra Alai, Avareches Adonai Yesher Yatzani Afleilos Shafra Afleilos Yisruni Chil Yosoi Shivisi Adonai Didi Tamid Kimimini Belhemot Fakein Tamat Libi V'Yagel Kvodi Apisari Yishkal Laveta Kilos Azov Nafshi Lishol Los Yitain Chatit Koli Roshachas Todi Eini Orach Hayim Savos Machos Es Panecha Nimos Bimincha Netzach. Someone to please be seated, and that concludes this part of the funeral.